Hello, thank you for joining me today. I'm Robert Joseph, and I've decided to offer you a mask pattern along with a tutorial. So I have a pattern here that I created, and it does have some of the information listed here on the pattern itself. I have also give you some guidance or suggestions for the materials to be used for your mask. I'm going to suggest that you use 100% cotton. That's what I'm going to be using today. Also, this pattern requires that you cut two pieces, front and a back. So what I'm suggesting is that you make two sides to the mask and have them different. This way, the healthcare professional knows which way they had the mask going toward their patient or to the outside world if they happen to take it off. So if they actually forget and they use the other side, then they're more susceptible to acquiring the virus. This is one of the masks that the pattern is actually the same, but I have two different versions. I have one with elastic, and then I have the other that has ties. So you can either tie it or use the elastic ties. So I show you both ways of how to put those on. I also leave both of them have an opening for any kind of filter that you might want to put in. I notice that a lot of people are doing that as well. So another suggestion that isn't on the pattern is to pre-wash your fabrics in hot water and then dry them in a hot dryer. This is so that when they're washed, they don't continue to shrink a whole lot. Also, just kind of going through the pattern to show you what obviously it has the pleats. For those of you who maybe may be new to some pattern, I have little notches here. There are 6 notches. This is the indicator of your pleats. And then I have 2 notches up here that indicate the opening for the filter. I myself am actually making some masks for my community here. I live in a very small community, so I'm making masks for anyone who works in adult care or even the clinic that is down the street. So I'm also in that face mask community of making them for our health care workers to use. So without any more introduction, let's get to making these masks. Okay, so this is the pattern. It's basically just a rectangle with 3 pleats in it. Now this is formatted for American 8.5 by 11. When you go to select a print, select actual size. If you choose fit to page, it will actually decrease the size of this mask a little bit. So it's suggested that you select actual size. So this will probably not print on any European A4 systems. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to measure this for you and give you the dimensions of this pattern, should you want to draft this yourself. So this pattern includes 1/2-inch seam allowances all the way around. So the rectangle size in lengthwise is about 10 inches. Height-wise is about 7.5 inches. Now we have several notches around here. At the top of the mask is where you can leave an opening for any kind of filter you want to put inside. So the notch placement from the side is about 3.5 inches from either side. The first pleat notch from the top is about 1.5 inches, and these pleat widths are 1 inch. So measure down 1.5 inches to mark your first notch, then 1 inch to the second notch. The distance between each pleat is here. This is 3/4 of an inch. So mark this notch, and then your pleat width, which is 1 inch, and then 3/4 inch mark, and then 1 inch and mark. So to recap again, I have a rectangle size 10 inches by 7.5 inches. Your notches for the opening are 3.5 inches from either side. And then you have 1 inch pleat marks along the side area. Again, 1.5 inches, 1/2 inch seam allowances all the way around. So I put all of the information here for sewing instructions briefly here on this side, and then over here I have the cut amounts. It says cut 2 pieces. Now I put a suggestion here that if you're gonna cut 2 pieces, it's suggested that the 2 sides be different, so whoever's wearing it will know which side they've been wearing toward the patient or toward the outside, so that if they take the mask off, they don't accidentally put that side toward their face. It's just an added precaution. So today I'm going to use 2 different printed fabrics. I've also given you suggestions here for where the elastic end placements are, and I have kind of a dotted line here just to show you that the loop would happen. I'm actually going to do 2 masks for you today. So I have this elastic, and we're just going to actually sew it into the seam here. So remember that you have 1/2 inch seam allowances up here, so you want to actually place that elastic or that tie just underneath that 1/2 inch elastic when we sew it together. Now I'm actually going to do the pleats first and then sew everything together. I know a lot of other demonstrators have been sewing it all together and then doing the pleats. It doesn't matter which way that you do it, as long as you know that this pattern has 3 1-inch pleats in it, so that you can keep those dimensions. So I have actually already cut out my pattern piece here. So you're going to cut around the areas and then mark all of your notches. Okay, I'm going to lay my fabrics out now. I have a lot of extra Christmas fabric, so that's why I'm using this, because I normally work in knits, and this is probably about the only woven fabric that I have, and I'm using 100% cotton fabric. This is basically quilting fabric. So I'm going to lay them on top of each other. Make sure your grains are together. This is my straight grain and this is my cross grain, and I've cut a piece out here, but that's all right. So I've got my pattern, can lay right on top, right? The 2 of them are going to be exactly the same, but I'm going to do 2 for you, one with the elastic here and one with ties. So I'll show you how I do the ties. So I'm going to mark this here. I'm going to weight it and get this cut out real quick. Okay, there's one. Now if you're going to do a lot of these, of course you could layer the fabric underneath it and then cut all those layers together and use this cut edge here. Since this is just a rectangle, you know, you could just mark your fabric, whatever the measurements are, and then come back and mark your notches. All right, that's done. I'll get rid of this excess fabric for now. Now I need to clip or mark all of the notches, so you can either use chalk if you have white chalk. I have this, but I won't be able to see a lot of the markings. I generally don't need to mark because I use clips. You could also use an erasable pen. So I have 4 layers here. I'm going to lay the pattern on here. I might want to weight this a little bit. Now remember, your seam allowances are 1/2 inch, so clip in only about half of that. And I'm going to clip for my notches. All right. So now I have 2 masks that are going to be 2 ply. Now of course you can add another ply to this or do 4 ply. That would be even better, which would sew 2 pieces together and act like they're one. but I've got these 4 pieces I'm going to get ready to do to mark the pleats. Okay, so now I'm going to pin my pleats. So one at a time, find out where my clips for my pleats are, and I'm going to take the bottom pleat and I'm going to pinch that, and I'm going to fold to match it up to the top pleat. Now I'm just doing folding up. You could also fold down if you want to. It is nice if you have them going all in the same direction. So I'm going to look for the bottom pleat on the second one, fold, get that, hold on to that, and then match it up to the top pleat, top notch. And for the last one, so now if you're gonna do this after you sew everything together, which you can do, what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna fold 1/2 inch pleats. So the total pleat amount is 1 inch. The pleat depth itself, which is here, from the notch to the folded edge, is 1/2 inch. And then I'm gonna turn this around and to make sure that you're folding the pleat the same way on the other side. So everything lines up and the pleat is folded going the same direction. The second one. And then the last one again, take that bottom pleat and fold it up to the top notch for the pleat. Okay, and then you can see how all those folds for those pleats line up. Now you could press this if you want. I'm gonna wait to press until I get all done. But this is generally how you want to pin it. And now we'll go ahead and just stitch these in place, and I'm gonna stitch close to the 1/2 inch, a little less than the 1/2 inch, so that when I sew this all together, I don't see that stitch line. So I'm gonna just pleat all of these other ones, get these all pinned, so you don't have to watch me do this. Okay, so I've got all of my pleats pinned, and now I'm gonna go stitch them in place right along here, along the seam allowance area. Okay, so now that I've got the pleats all sewn, I'm just going to give this a quick press just to flatten everything. Just real quick. Nothing fancy. Okay, and I'll do that with all of the pieces. Right. Now we're ready to tack on the ties or the elastic. Okay, so if you're using elastic, choose one of the pieces to actually tack it to, it doesn't matter. I'm going to use this wider piece just so there's no confusion with the print. So remember that you have a 1/2 inch here that you're actually going to be sewing a 1/2 inch. So you want to make sure that you're going to be tacking that elastic just underneath that 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to almost put it all the way up to the edge and pin it. Okay, that's the first one. This other end, you're going to kind of bring around to put at the bottom of the pleat, just above where your 1/2 inch is in here. So make sure that when you pull that, maneuver that around to the other side, the bottom half, is that you don't have it twisted. That would be just kind of irritating on the body. So just keep it flat and pull it around till you get to the desired spot underneath where the pleats are. Okay, so again on the other side I'll do match the same side just under your 1/2 inch up to the edge. And make sure everything is flat and kind of turn it around to the bottom and pin it there. And I cut these elastics 7 inches long. This is 3/8 inch wide elastic. You could use something thinner. It just depends on what you have on hand. All right, so that's how we would pin the elastic on. Okay, so if you're going to use binding ties, then you're going to need to, I have a suggestion here down at the bottom. They should be 18 to 20 inches long and probably between 1 1/4 inch and 1 1/2 inches wide, and then we'll turn those into ties. So I'm going to assume that it's actually better to cut these on the straight grain or on the cross grain instead of the bias, because the bias will stretch as it's worn, and for healthcare workers you don't want the mask to be sliding off. You want them to be kept in place. So the stronger grain that you can cut these on, the better. And again, I'm suggesting, I cut mine 20 inches long and 1 1/2 inches wide. Now, for those of you who have binding tools like this, you slip the fabric in here and actually folds it. You could use this as well. Just follow the directions on your guide. I'm not going to do that because a lot of people may not have these. I've pre-cut my strips, so I'll show you my technique for creating the binding. What we're going to do is we're going to fold each of these into the center, and then that will be folded over again and stitched down. But I have a little, so instead of trying to figure out what that is by eye, this is how I do it. I'm actually just going to fold this in half and give it a really quick press. That will give me a center line that I know that I can fold each edge to, right? And I can do that one at a time, but now I can kind of see where that's going. And I think this is a little bit lighter fabric, so I'm actually going to press one of these edges all the way to the folded side, and then the other side I'll fold to match that. And my iron is steaming and it's hot. And then all I have to do is fold this over to the other side. And that didn't take very long at all. I just need to do the other three. So now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch right here to keep this closed, and that will be a good tie. And you can see that it really doesn't have that much stretch in it, if there's any stretch at all. Okay, so again, I quickly fold in half to get that center line, and then I press one end over to that center line, and then I fold the other raw edge to match that, and then I fold it over on top of each other, press it down, and that gives me a place here where I can stitch that together. Okay, so for the ties, remember we just made our ties. We have 4. We have 1 at each of the tops and then 1 at each of the bottom. So it doesn't matter which piece you tack them to. I like to tack them instead of just pinning them before I sew around. So we're going to tack them. I'm going to tack it to the white piece just so there's no confusion within the print. So it doesn't matter which side your stitching is up or down on these. And remember, you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, so you're going to place this, one of the ends at just below that 1/2 inch, and I will pin it in place. And then I'm going to take another one of these and pin it here at the bottom, just above that, where that 1/2 inch is. Okay, and then you're going to need to kind of put that all together here in the center. We're going to do the same thing over on this side, just under that 1/2 inch. And then your other tie at the bottom above that 1/2 inch here. Now, one thing about this you need to be careful about. Make sure that you get all of your ties here in the middle so that they don't get sewn in your sewing when you put these together. So now you could sew this all together, pin it all together, but I'm just going to tack these here first, and then we'll come back and we'll put the other side and then sew everything together. Okay, so we've got the elastic tacked here. I'm going to take my other piece, and remember we have the 2 notches. They're up here for the top of this. This is the opening, so for people who want to put a filter in there, you have the space there. So we're going to carefully face sides together, match those notches, and I'm going to put a pin at for the opening here. And then match your edges all together all the way around. And you want to be careful that when you come to the sides that you don't accidentally get your elastic stuck in any of the seams. So make sure that those are well moved away from where you're stitching. And again, these are 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Make sure I don't have that elastic getting sewn anywhere else. All right, so this is all pinned. So I'm going to start here, pivot at the corner, pivot here, sew across, pivot at this corner, sew up, pivot at this corner, and then back. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so for the ties, if you've done the ties, you want to make sure that the excess of the ties are well within the perimeter area of where you're going to be stitching. So I've just kind of curled everything up into the center, and now I can grab my other piece, lining up, matching it face to face to the top notches where the opening is going to be. So I'll match those, and I'm going to put a pin right there. That's really going to be my beginning and ending stitching areas. And then I will match the raw edges around and pin very carefully, not to disturb what you have under here. Make sure that that you're not sewing the any of the ties into the seams that you're going to be sewing. Okay, so I've got it stitched all the way around. Everything looks good for this. So now I'm going to start here and stitch pivot, 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 and then end. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now that I have both masks sewn around, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just press around where I sewed to set those stitches. And then I'm going to clip my corners. And so we get a better point. And now I'm going to, this is the elastic, I'm going to turn this face side out, or right side out, carefully. We'll grab the elastic and pull that out. Okay. So now because I had the elastic like right about where the 1/2 inch was where I pivoted, I get some pretty good corners. This one's not so good, but that's all right. And then what I'll do is kind of roll this seam at the bottom, see if we get a good, get that pressed out. Not having any luck right now. That seam comes out, and it gets it, you can give it a nice, really nice press that way. See what I've got here. All right. Now you could probably also have, you know, overlocked the edges before you did the sewing so that these edges here won't unravel, but I'm not really that worried that that's gonna happen in the wash because it's such a short area. This is the opening where you would put the filter in, right? And it expands this large, right? So these ends are approximately 3.5 wide, and I'm actually going to do some top stitching on this one as well. Set that aside, and now I'm going to pull the ties out. And again, my ties were placed up by the corners, so those pull out, make a nice edge there. Right, and then you can give it a quick press all the way across. Press that opening a little bit flatter. Okay, and this is the one with the ties. Now these tie ends, you could roll this over a couple times and tack that down here. But sometimes home machines, their feed dogs don't like this little width, that won't grab it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a knot. And I'll do that with all of them. So I'll just make a quick knot, and that will keep it from unraveling. The other thing I'm going to do on both of these is to give it a little bit more support here where the ties and the elastic are. I'm going to top stitch this down, and I'll probably do one row and then turn it over and go back, and then we'll almost be done. All right, and there we are. Our face masks are done. So top stitching here on either side to hold everything together and in place, a little bit more stability. You've got the opening for a filter to put in here. You could also carry that top stitching through the bottom if you like, and up here just to the opening. Remember, you still need that opening so that you can put that filter in. Okay, so there we have one with the elastic and one with the ties.